The rain had been falling over Los Angeles for 3 days straight. February in Southern California rarely brought this kind of weather, the kind that turned the palm-lined streets into rivers and made even the freeways feel like something out of a forgotten dream. Inside Studio 9 at KLTV, however, the rain was just background noise, a distant drum roll beneath the bright lights and polished floors of the most watched late-night talk show in the Western region. Derek Holloway adjusted his tie in the mirror, studying his reflection with the kind of satisfaction that came from 15 years of uninterrupted success. At 47, he had the look of a man who had never been told no, whose jawline had graced magazine covers and whose voice had become synonymous with witty commentary and sharp-edged humor. The Derek Holloway Show had been on the air for almost a decade, and in that time, Derek had made a career out of saying what others were afraid to say. He called it courage. His critics called it cruelty, wrapped in charm. Tonight was no different. The green room buzzed with energy as producers shuffled papers and assistants spoke into headsets. The guest list was solid: a rising pop star, a retired basketball player, and a tech entrepreneur who had just sold his company for $3 billion. But Derek was not thinking about them. He was thinking about the monologue. The monologue was always the heart of the show. It was where Derek could be himself, where he could let his humor fly without the constraints of polite conversation. And tonight, he had found what he considered to be the perfect target. A week earlier, a video had gone viral on social media. It showed a group of bikers, leather-clad and bearded, escorting a young boy to his first day of school. The boy, according to the reports, had been the victim of persistent bullying, and the bikers, members of a group called the Iron Wolves, had volunteered to walk him to class every day until he felt safe again. The internet had fallen in love with the story. Millions of views, thousands of comments praising the bikers as heroes. Derek had watched the video twice and felt something stir in his chest. It was not admiration, it was irritation. The kind of irritation that came from watching the world celebrate something he did not understand. To Derek, bikers were relics of a bygone era, men who clung to leather and chrome because they had nothing else to cling to. He saw them as outcasts playing dress-up, pretending to be tough while the real world moved on without them. The idea that these men could be heroes struck him as absurd, even offensive, and so he had decided to say exactly that on national television. The clock on the wall read 8:53, 7 minutes until showtime. Derek ran through his notes one final time, a smile curling at the corner of his lips. This was going to be good. The studio audience filed in, filling the rows of red velvet seats with the energy of anticipation. They were mostly young professionals, the kind of people who watched late-night television to feel connected to something larger than their own lives. They laughed at Derek's jokes because laughing made them feel like they were part of an inside circle, a club of people who understood the world the way Derek did. The lights dimmed. The band began to play. And then Derek Holloway walked onto the stage, his arms spread wide as if embracing the applause itself. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "Welcome to the show. We have got a fantastic lineup for you tonight. But first, let us talk about something that has been on my mind all week." He paused for effect, letting the silence build. "You have all seen the video, right? The one with the bikers and the kid?" Derek made a face of exaggerated confusion. "Now, I do not want to be controversial here, but can we talk about how ridiculous this is?" A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience. Derek took it as encouragement. "I mean, look at these guys." He gestured toward the screen behind him, where a still image from the video appeared. Leather jackets, bandanas, beards that could house small animals. And we are supposed to believe they are heroes? The laughter grew louder. Derek leaned into the microphone. "Here is what I think happened. These guys were on their way to a biker bar, took a wrong turn, and accidentally ended up at a school. And instead of admitting they were lost, they just went with it." The audience erupted. Derek basked in the sound like a man standing in warm sunlight. "But seriously," he continued, wiping a tear from his eye, Can we stop pretending that anyone who wears leather and rides a motorcycle is automatically some kind of guardian angel? These are the same people who think loud pipes are a personality trait. The same people who believe that a skull patch makes them look intimidating instead of just confused. More laughter. Derek was on a roll now, feeding off the energy of the room. And the kid. Let us talk about the kid for a second. What kind of message are we sending here? Oh, you are being bullied? Do not worry, we will just call in some guys who look like they have outstanding warrants. Problem solved. The band played a comedic sting. Derek took a bow. Look, I am sure these bikers are very nice people, but let us be honest. The only thing they are protecting that kid from is good taste. He laughed at his own joke, and the audience laughed with him. For 5 minutes, Derek Holloway had turned the Iron Wolves into a punchline. He had taken a story of compassion and reduced it to a joke about leather and loud motorcycles. And somewhere in the hills east of Los Angeles, in a clubhouse that smelled of motor oil and coffee, a group of men watched the broadcast in silence. The room was called the Chapel, though there was nothing holy about it beyond the code of honor that bound the men who gathered there. The walls were lined with photographs, decades of rides, charity events, funerals, weddings. A flag hung in the corner, faded and worn from years of being carried at the front of countless parades. Marcus Cole stood at the back of the room, his arms crossed over his chest. At 52, he was the oldest member of the Iron Wolves, and, by unspoken agreement, their leader. His face was weathered by years of sun and wind, his beard streaked with gray. He had served 2 tours in Iraq before coming home to a country that did not know what to do with him. The Iron Wolves had given him a purpose, a family, a reason to keep putting one foot in front of the other. Now, he watched as a man on television mocked everything he and his brothers stood for. The other members were scattered around the room, some standing, some seated on worn leather couches. There was Ray, the club's sergeant-at-arms, a former Marine whose tattoos told the story of every battle he had survived. There was Tommy, the youngest member, barely 25, who had found the wolves after losing his mother to cancer and his father to grief. And there was Elena, one of the few women who had earned a patch, a trauma nurse who spent her weekends organizing food drives for homeless veterans. None of them spoke. They just watched. On the screen, Derek Holloway was still talking, his voice dripping with condescension. I am sure these bikers are very nice people. But let us be honest. The only thing they are protecting that kid from is good taste. Ray turned off the television. The silence that followed was heavier than any words. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low and steady. That man does not know us. Tommy shifted in his seat. He does not have to know us. He has already decided who we are. Elena shook her head. This is what people do. They see the leather, the bikes, the patches. They do not see the $20,000 we raised last year for the Children's Hospital. They do not see the hours we spend mentoring kids who have no one else. They see what they want to see, Marcus said, and that man on the television wants to see a joke. Silence again. Then Ray stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow across the room. So what do we do about it? Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then his eyes moved across the room, taking in the faces of the men and women who had become his family. We show him, he said quietly. We show him who we really are. The plan came together over the next 2 days. It was not a plan for confrontation, though some of the younger members had suggested as much. It was not a plan for revenge, though the idea had certainly crossed a few minds. It was something else entirely. Something that Marcus had learned in the dusty streets of Fallujah and the quiet rooms of veterans' hospitals. The best way to defeat an enemy was not to fight him. It was to change his mind. Derek Holloway had made his jokes because he did not understand. He had mocked the Iron Wolves because they were easy targets, symbols he could tear down without consequence. But symbols could be rebuilt, and sometimes the most powerful response to mockery was not anger, but truth. The studio at KLTV received the letter on a Wednesday morning. It was handwritten, which itself was unusual enough to catch the attention of the receptionist. The envelope was addressed to Derek Holloway, and it bore a return address from somewhere in the San Gabriel Valley. Inside, on a single sheet of paper, were the following words: Mr. Holloway, we are the Iron Wolves. You spoke about us on your show last week. We understand that you were trying to be funny, and we understand that our appearance makes us easy targets for humor. But we believe there is more to any story than what appears on the surface. We are writing to invite you to spend a day with us. No cameras, no scripts, no agenda. Just a chance to see who we really are, beyond the leather and the motorcycles. If you accept, we will arrange transportation and ensure your complete safety. We hope you will consider this invitation. Respectfully, Marcus Cole, President, Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club. The letter arrived on Derek's desk that afternoon, placed there by an assistant who thought it might make for interesting content. Derek read it twice, then set it aside with a dismissive laugh. "These guys want me to hang out with them," he told his producer, a sharp-eyed woman named Sandra who had been with the show since its first season. Can you imagine? Me, riding around on some motorcycle with a bunch of guys who look like they escaped from a prison documentary? Sandra did not laugh. She was looking at the letter with an expression Derek could not quite read. "You know," she said slowly, "this could be good television." Derek blinked. "Excuse me?" "Think about it. You go spend a day with these bikers, cameras rolling, and we get to see if they are really the heroes everyone thinks they are. Either way, it is a story. Either they prove you wrong, which makes for great drama, or they prove you right, which vindicates everything you said." Derek considered this. The idea of being proven wrong was not appealing, but he had to admit there was a certain theatrical appeal to the scenario, the talk show host versus the biker gang. It practically wrote itself. "Fine," he said. "Set it up, but I want security, and I want final cut on whatever we film." Sandra nodded, already on it. The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday, but what Derek did not know, what he could not have known, was that the Iron Wolves had already begun to change his life in ways he would not understand until much later. It started with a phone call. Derek was in his office, reviewing notes for that evening's show, when his cell phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but he answered anyway, assuming it was one of the countless contacts he had accumulated over the years. "Mr. Suryak, Holloway?" The voice on the other end was female, young, and trembling slightly. "Yes." "Who is this?" "My name is Maria Gutierrez. I am a nurse at Valley Children's Hospital. I am calling because I thought you should know something about the people you talked about on your show." Derek leaned back in his chair. "If this is about the bikers, I am already meeting with them this weekend." "I know." Maria paused. "But I wanted to tell you something first. Something that might help you understand." Derek said nothing. He was not sure why, but something in the woman's voice made him want to listen. 3 months ago," Maria continued, "a little girl came into our hospital. Her name was Sophie. She was 8 years old and she had leukemia. Her parents could not afford the treatment she needed. The insurance had run out, and they were looking at losing their home just to keep their daughter alive." Derek felt something shift in his chest. He did not know what it was, but it was uncomfortable. "The Iron Wolves heard about Sophie through one of our social workers," Maria said. "They organized a fundraiser, a ride across the state, collecting donations at every stop. They raised over $50,000 in 2 weeks, and then they came to the hospital, every single one of them, and they sat with Sophie while she went through her chemotherapy. They read her stories, they brought her stuffed animals. They made her laugh when she had forgotten what laughing felt like." Derek's throat tightened. He did not say anything. "Sophie finished her treatment last month," Maria said. "She is in remission. And every time she sees a motorcycle on the road, she waves and smiles because she knows that somewhere out there are people who saved her life." The line was quiet for a long moment. "I just thought you should know," Maria said, "before you meet them." And then she hung up. Derek sat alone in his office for a long time after that. The notes in front of him seemed meaningless now, the jokes he had written feeling hollow and small. He thought about Sophie, a name he had never heard before today, a child whose life had been touched by the very people he had mocked on national television. For the first time in years, Derek Holloway felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt ashamed. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, because if you believe that real stories of courage and redemption deserve to be heard, this is where they live. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and a cold wind that swept down from the mountains. Derek stood outside his apartment building at 7 in the morning, his hands shoved into the pockets of a jacket he rarely wore. He had dressed down for the occasion, trading his usual designer suits for jeans and a plain button-up shirt, though he still felt overdressed for what lay ahead. A black SUV pulled up to the curb, and a woman stepped out. She was in her 40s, with short gray hair and the kind of steady gaze that made Derek feel like he was being evaluated. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "I am Elena. Marcus sent me to bring you." Derek nodded, trying to project a confidence he did not feel. He climbed into the passenger seat, and Elena pulled away from the curb without another word. The drive took nearly an hour. They left the city behind, winding through canyons and past stretches of open land that Derek had never known existed so close to Los Angeles. Elena did not try to make conversation, and Derek found himself grateful for the silence. It gave him time to think. He thought about the phone call from Maria. He thought about Sophie, the little girl with leukemia, and the bikers who had sat beside her through her darkest days. He thought about the words he had spoken on his show, the laughter he had encouraged, the assumptions he had made. And for the first time, he wondered if he had been wrong. The clubhouse appeared around a bend in the road, a low-slung building surrounded by motorcycles and pickup trucks. Smoke rose from a chimney, and Derek could hear voices and laughter from inside. Elena parked the SUV and turned to him. "Marcus asked me to tell you something before you go in," she said. "He asked me to tell you that whatever happens today, you are safe here. No one is going to hurt you or threaten you or make you feel unwelcome. We invited you because we want you to see the truth. That is all." Derek swallowed. Why would he think I would be worried about my safety? Elena smiled, but there was no mockery in it. "Because most people are. They see us and they assume the worst." "That is the whole point, is it not?" She got out of the car and walked toward the clubhouse. After a moment, Derek followed. The interior of the chapel was nothing like what Derek had expected. He had imagined something dark and menacing, walls covered in skulls and chains, the air thick with smoke and hostility. Instead, he found a warm, welcoming space that reminded him of his grandfather's workshop. There were shelves lined with books and trophies, photographs of children and families, a bulletin board covered with thank you cards and drawings. And there were the bikers. They stood and sat in small groups, talking quietly among themselves. Some wore leather vests covered with patches, while others were dressed in simple t-shirts and jeans. A few nodded at Derek as he entered, but no one stared, no one whispered. They simply made room for him as if he belonged there. Marcus Cole stepped forward from the back of the room. He was taller than Derek had expected, with a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, his eyes steady and calm. "Mr. Holloway," he said, "thank you for coming." Derek found that his voice had abandoned him. He cleared his throat. "Thank you for inviting me." Marcus gestured toward a seat near the fireplace. "Please, we have a lot to show you today." The first stop was a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was a nondescript building, the kind of place Derek would have driven past 1,000 times without noticing. But inside, it was transformed into something entirely unexpected. Rows of shelves held canned food, bottled water, blankets, and clothing. Volunteers moved between the aisles, sorting donations and packing boxes. A banner on the far wall read, "Iron Wolves Community Pantry, serving our neighbors since 2011. "We started this 12 years ago," Marcus explained as they walked through the space. "One of our members lost his job during the recession. He had 3 kids and no way to feed them. We pooled our resources, bought groceries, and dropped them off at his house. And then we thought, why stop there?" Derek looked around at the volunteers, many of whom were wearing Iron Wolves patches. "How many people do you serve?" "About 300 families a month," Marcus said. "And that number keeps growing." The second stop was a youth center in a neighborhood Derek had only ever seen on the news, usually in connection with some tragedy or another. The building was modest but well-maintained, with a basketball court out back and murals covering the walls. Inside, a group of teenagers sat in a circle, listening as an older biker spoke. Derek recognized him from the clubhouse, a man named Ray with arms like tree trunks and a voice that carried across the room. "The thing about respect," Ray was saying, "is that you cannot demand it. You have to earn it, every single day, through your actions and your choices. And sometimes, the hardest person to earn respect from is yourself." The teenagers listened in silence. A few of them nodded. Marcus leaned toward Derek. "Ray comes here twice a week. He runs a mentorship program for kids who have gotten into trouble with the law. Most of them have never had an adult in their lives who believed in them." Derek watched as Ray continued to speak, his words simple but powerful. He thought about the jokes he had made on his show, the assumptions he had carried like badges of honor. He had been so sure he understood these people. He had been so wrong. The third stop was the hardest. It was a cemetery, quiet and peaceful, with rows of white headstones stretching toward the horizon. Marcus led Derek to a section near the back, where a small gathering of bikers stood in silence. "Every year," Marcus said, "we come here on this day, to remember." Derek looked at the headstones. Each one bore a name, a date, and beneath that a single word: veteran. "These are men and women who served their country," Marcus continued. "Some of them died in combat. Some of them died afterwards, unable to escape the wounds that no one else could see. We come here to make sure they are not forgotten." Derek felt something break inside him. It was not dramatic, not loud. It was the quiet sound of certainty crumbling, of assumptions falling away like dead leaves. He thought about his monologue, about the laughter he had harvested from his audience. He thought about the words he had used, the contempt he had shown for people he had never bothered to understand. And he realized, with a clarity that surprised him, that he had been the villain in this story all along. The day ended back at the clubhouse as the sun began to set behind the mountains. Derek sat in a corner, nursing a cup of coffee, while the bikers moved around him in easy fellowship. Children ran through the room, chased by laughing adults. Someone strummed a guitar in the corner. It was, Derek realized, exactly like a family gathering. Marcus sat down beside him. "So," he said, "what do you think?" Derek was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I think I owe you an apology." Marcus shook his head. "You do not owe us anything. I made you into a joke," Derek said. "I stood on that stage and I tore you apart for the entertainment of strangers. I did not know you. I did not try to know you. I just assumed." "Most people do," Marcus said. "It is easier to judge than to understand." Derek looked at him. "How can you be so calm about this?" "I humiliated you on national television." "Because anger does not change anything," Marcus said. "When I was in Iraq, I learned that the only way to survive was to focus on what I could control. I could not control the enemy. I could not control the politicians who sent us there. All I could control was my own response, so I chose to respond with purpose instead of rage." Derek absorbed this. After a while, he asked, "Why did you invite me here?" "Because you have a platform," Marcus said. "You reach millions of people every night, and those people trust you to tell them what is true. We did not invite you here to shame you or to convert you. We invited you here so that the next time you talk about us, you will know who we really are." The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with understanding rather than tension. Derek Holloway had come to the clubhouse expecting to find criminals and outcasts. Instead, he had found teachers, mentors, volunteers, and veterans. He had found people who had taken their pain and transformed it into purpose. He had found a family. And he had found something he had not known he was looking for. He had found himself. The following Monday, Derek returned to the studio. The familiar lights and cameras felt different now, charged with a significance he had never noticed before. His staff moved around him in their usual efficient ballet, preparing for another evening of entertainment. But Derek was not thinking about entertainment. He was thinking about truth. Sandra approached him with a clipboard. "Tonight's monologue is ready." You want to review it? Derek shook his head. I am not using it. Sandra blinked. What? I am going to say something else tonight. Something I should have said a long time ago. The audience filed in at their usual time, filling the seats with the expectation of laughter. They had come to be entertained, to forget their worries for an hour, to feel like they were part of something clever and sophisticated. They had no idea what was about to happen. The lights dimmed, the band began to play, and Derek Holloway walked onto the stage. But this time he did not spread his arms in triumph. He did not smile his usual knowing smile. Instead, he walked to the center of the stage and stood there, looking out at the faces of strangers who had trusted him to make them laugh. "Good evening," he said. "I need to tell you something." The audience stirred, sensing that something was different. Derek took a deep breath. 3 weeks ago, I stood on this stage and I made jokes about a group of people called the Iron Wolves. I called them relics. I called them outcasts. I implied that they were criminals playing dress-up, men and women with nothing better to do than ride loud motorcycles and pretend to be heroes. He paused. The studio was silent. I was wrong. The words hung in the air like smoke. Derek continued. This weekend, I spent a day with the Iron Wolves. I saw their community pantry, where they feed 300 families every month. I saw their youth center, where they mentor teenagers who have never had an adult believe in them. I saw them standing in a cemetery, honoring veterans who gave everything for this country. His voice cracked slightly. He did not try to hide it. I saw a little girl named Sophie, who had leukemia, whose family could not afford her treatment. The Iron Wolves raised $50,000 and sat beside her bed while she fought for her life. She is in remission now, and she waves at every motorcycle she sees because she knows that somewhere out there are people who saved her. Derek looked directly into the camera. I stood on this stage and I made those people into a punchline. I encouraged you to laugh at them, and I did it because it was easy, because they looked different from me, because I assumed I knew who they were without ever bothering to find out. If you are watching this and you think what I'm saying is some kind of reverse satire or some new form of irony, leave a comment saying, "Sometimes being wrong is the beginning of being right." I want to read those comments. I want to know that this message reached you. That is not courage. That is cowardice dressed up in expensive suits and clever words. Real courage is what those bikers do every day. Real courage is showing up for strangers, protecting children, honoring the dead, and never asking for anything in return. The audience was motionless. Some of them were crying. Derek lowered his voice. I cannot take back what I said, but I can do better, and I want to start right now. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the wings of the stage. Marcus, would you come out here? A murmur rippled through the audience as Marcus Cole walked onto the stage. He was wearing his Iron Wolves vest, the patches gleaming under the studio lights. He looked like what Derek had once called a relic, an outcast, a joke. But now, standing beside him, Derek saw something else entirely. He saw a hero. Marcus, Derek said, I owe you an apology. A real one. Not the kind we say to make ourselves feel better, but the kind that costs something. I was ignorant, I was arrogant, and I was cruel. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Apology accepted. The audience erupted, not in the laughter Derek had always chased, but in something deeper. Applause, yes, but also tears. Some people stood. Others simply sat in silence, absorbing what they had witnessed. Derek Holloway had done something he had never done before. He had told the truth. The aftermath of that night rippled outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. The video of Derek's apology went viral within hours, viewed by millions who had never watched his show before. Comments poured in from around the world, many of them containing the phrase Derek had requested. Sometimes being wrong is the beginning of being right. But the real changes happened away from the cameras, in the quiet spaces where true transformation takes place. Derek began visiting the Iron Wolves clubhouse regularly. At first he came as an observer, sitting in the corner while the bikers went about their work. But gradually he became something more. He helped sort donations at the community pantry. He sat in on Ray's mentorship sessions, listening as teenagers shared their struggles and dreams. He attended charity rides, his expensive sports car replaced by a seat on the back of Marcus's motorcycle. The other members of the club were wary of him at first, and rightfully so. He had mocked them on national television. He had reduced their life's work to a punchline. Trust, they had learned, was not something given freely, but Derek did not ask for their trust. He earned it. Weeks turned into months. The Derek Holloway Show continued, but it was different now. The monologues were still sharp, still funny, but they had lost their cruelty. Derek found that he could make people laugh without making them laugh at someone else. It was harder, requiring more skill and more thought, but it was also more satisfying. More importantly, Derek began using his platform for something he had never considered before. He started a segment called Unseen Heroes, dedicated to telling the stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. He interviewed the volunteers at homeless shelters, the teachers who stayed late to help struggling students, the veterans who had found new purpose in service to their communities. He gave voice to the voiceless, visibility to the invisible. And throughout it all, he kept coming back to the Iron Wolves. One evening, about 6 months after his first visit to the clubhouse, Derek found himself sitting alone with Marcus on the back porch of the building. The sun had set, and the sky was painted in shades of purple and gold. The sound of laughter and conversation drifted from inside. "Can I ask you something?" Derek said. Marcus nodded. "Why did you forgive me so easily? I mean, I said terrible things about you. I made your entire community into a joke. Most people would have been furious. They would have wanted revenge, or at least some kind of public humiliation. But you just invited me to spend a day with you. You showed me who you really are. Why?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "When I was in Iraq, there was a man in my unit named Hector. He was from Texas, born and raised, grew up hating anyone who did not look like him or talk like him. When he found out I was black, he refused to shake my hand, refused to eat at the same table, made my life miserable for the first 6 months of our deployment." Derek listened in silence. "Then one day, we got hit. IED on the road. Half our convoy was gone in an instant. Hector and I ended up trapped in what was left of our vehicle, surrounded by hostile territory, with no idea if help was coming." Marcus paused, his eyes distant. "We were stuck there for 18 hours. 18 hours of not knowing if we were going to live or die. And during that time, we talked. Really talked, for the first time. He told me about his childhood, about the fear and anger that had been poured into him from the day he was born. He told me he was scared, and that he did not want to die hating anyone." Derek felt his throat tighten. "We were rescued eventually," Marcus continued. "And when we got back to base, Hector looked me in the eye and apologized. Not just for how he had treated me, but for everything he had believed before we met. He said that 18 hours had taught him more than 40 years of living." Marcus turned to face Derek. "Hector and I stayed in touch after we came home. He passed away 3 years ago, cancer. But before he died, he told me something I have never forgotten. He said, 'The only way to defeat hate is with understanding. You cannot argue someone out of their beliefs. You cannot shame them into changing. You can only show them a different way and hope they have the courage to see it.'" Derek understood now. He understood why the Iron Wolves had invited him, why Marcus had extended his hand instead of his fist, why forgiveness had come so freely. It was not because they were weak. It was because they were strong. Strong enough to believe that people could change. Strong enough to give them the chance. "You saw something in me that I did not see in myself," Derek said quietly. "You believed I could be better." Marcus smiled. "I believed you wanted to be better. That is the only thing anyone needs to change. The rest is just showing up." The sun had fully set now, and the stars were beginning to appear. Derek looked up at them, thinking about the journey that had brought him here. He thought about the man he had been 6 months ago, the man who stood on a stage and made jokes at the expense of strangers. That man seemed like a distant memory now, a character from a story he no longer wanted to tell. "I want to do something," Derek said. "Something real. Something that matters." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" Derek had been thinking about this for weeks. He had resources that the Iron Wolves did not, connections and influence that could be put to better use than late-night punchlines. "I want to start a foundation," he said. "Something that supports the work you are doing here. The pantry, the youth center, the veteran support, all of it. And I want to expand it, take it national, help other communities build the same kind of programs." Marcus studied him for a long moment. "That would take a lot of time, a lot of commitment." "I know. It would mean giving up some of the spotlight, letting others take the credit. I know that too." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then let us do it." They shook hands, and in that moment, something was sealed. Not just an agreement or a partnership, but a transformation. Derek Holloway, the man who had built a career on cleverness and contempt, had found a new purpose. And the Iron Wolves, the men and women he had once dismissed as relics and outcasts, had gained an unlikely ally. The night was quiet around them, filled with the sounds of friendship and fellowship from inside the clubhouse. Derek listened to it, feeling a peace he had not known in years. He had spent so long trying to be the smartest person in the room. Now, for the first time, he was content to simply be present, to be part of something larger than himself, to be, at last, a good man. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded remarkably like Marcus whispered a simple truth. Sometimes the smallest step in the right direction ends up being the biggest step of your life. The foundation was established 3 months later. Derek called it the Second Chance Initiative, a name that captured both its mission and his personal journey. The launch event was held at the Iron Wolves Clubhouse, with members of the club standing alongside tech entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and local politicians. It was an unlikely gathering, leather vests mingling with business suits, but it worked. The first project was an expansion of the community pantry. With Derek's connections and the Iron Wolves' organizational skills, they were able to establish satellite locations in 3 additional neighborhoods, each one staffed by volunteers and stocked with donated food and supplies. The second project was a mentorship program for at-risk youth, modeled after Ray's work at the community center. They recruited volunteers from across the city, professionals who were willing to give their time and expertise to young people who needed guidance. The third project was the one closest to Derek's heart. It was a support network for veterans struggling with the transition to civilian life, providing everything from job training to mental health resources. Marcus was the driving force behind it, drawing on his own experiences and connections to create something that truly made a difference. But perhaps the most unexpected outcome was what happened to Derek himself. He had started this journey as a spectator, an outsider looking in on a world he did not understand. But somewhere along the way, he had become part of it. He had earned his place among the Iron Wolves, not through force or cleverness, but through simple, consistent effort. He showed up, he listened, he learned. And in doing so, he discovered something he had been searching for his entire life without knowing it. He discovered who he wanted to be. A year after that first monologue, Derek stood on the stage of his show for what would be his final broadcast. The audience was larger than usual, filled with familiar faces. Members of the Iron Wolves sat in the front row, their patches gleaming under the lights. Sandra and the production team watched from the wings, their expressions a mixture of pride and sadness. Derek looked out at them all and smiled. "Good evening," he said. "As many of you know, this is my last show. After 15 years, I have decided to step away from this stage and focus on the work that has come to mean more to me than anything I have ever done." He paused, letting the moment breathe. "A year ago, I stood here and made jokes about a group of people I did not understand. I called them relics and outcasts. I implied that they were criminals playing dress-up, and millions of you laughed along with me." The audience was silent. Some of them remembered that night. Others had only heard about it. But then something happened, Derek continued. Those same people I had mocked invited me into their world. They showed me who they really were, and in doing so, they showed me who I could become. His voice grew stronger. The Iron Wolves taught me that courage is not about being loud or clever or always having the right answer. It is about showing up day after day for people who need you. It is about protecting the vulnerable, honoring the fallen, and believing that everyone deserves a second chance. Derek looked directly at Marcus, who sat in the front row with his arms crossed and a quiet smile on his face. They taught me that the measure of a person is not what they say on television, but what they do when no one is watching, and they gave me something I did not even know I was missing. He took a deep breath. They gave me a family. The audience rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous, but Derek barely heard it. He was looking at the faces of his friends, the men and women who had transformed his life. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for watching. Thank you for laughing. And thank you for giving me the chance to become someone better." He stepped back from the microphone, and the lights began to dim. But before the broadcast ended, Derek spoke one final time. "If you watched this far, it is because you believe in the power of second chances. Leave a comment saying I watched this far so I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories on this channel. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit the like button, subscribe. Because there are more stories like this waiting to be told." The screen faded to black and the credits began to roll. In the months and years that followed, the Second Chance Initiative grew beyond anything Derek or Marcus had imagined. The community pantry expanded to 12 locations across Southern California. The mentorship program helped over 1,000 young people find their path. The Veteran Support Network became a model for similar organizations across the country. Derek did not disappear entirely from public life. He made occasional appearances, gave interviews, and continued to use his platform to highlight the work being done by ordinary people. But he was no longer the center of attention. He had learned, finally, that there were more important things than being seen. The Iron Wolves continued their work as they always had, quietly and without fanfare. They rode their motorcycles through small towns and city streets, their patches a symbol not of menace but of protection. They showed up at hospitals and schools and funerals wherever they were needed, doing what they had always done. And Marcus Cole, the man who had invited a talk show host into his world and watched him transform, continued to lead by example. He never asked for credit or recognition. He simply showed up, day after day, for the people who needed him, because that was what it meant to be an Iron Wolf. That was what it meant to be a hero. Years later, on a warm evening in late spring, Derek found himself back at the clubhouse. It was the anniversary of his first visit, and the members had gathered for a celebration. There was food and music and laughter, the sounds of a family enjoying each other's company. Derek sat in the corner, watching it all with a quiet smile. He was older now, his hair streaked with gray, but he had never felt more alive. The journey that had begun with mockery and ended in transformation had given him everything he had ever wanted. Marcus sat down beside him, 2 bottles of water in his hands. "Thinking about the old days?" Marcus asked. Derek shook his head. "Thinking about how grateful I am that they are behind me." Marcus nodded. "You have come a long way." "We all have," Derek said. "Thanks to you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as children ran through the room and adults shared stories, and new members were welcomed into the fold. It was a scene of ordinary beauty, the kind that Derek had once thought was beneath him. Now he knew it was the only thing that mattered. "Do you ever regret it?" Derek asked. "Inviting me here, I mean. Giving me a chance when you had every reason to turn me away." Marcus smiled, not for a second. "Everyone deserves a chance to become who they were meant to be. You just needed someone to show you the way." Derek felt tears prick at his eyes. He did not try to hide them. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." Marcus put a hand on his shoulder. "You earned it, brother." The word hit Derek like a thunderclap. Brother. It was the highest honor the Iron Wolves could bestow, a recognition that went beyond friendship or partnership. It meant belonging. It meant family. Derek had spent his entire career trying to be the smartest person in the room, the wittiest, the most admired. He had chased applause and ratings and the fleeting satisfaction of a clever punchline. But none of it compared to this. None of it compared to being called brother by a man he had once mocked on national television. The evening wore on, and eventually the celebration began to wind down. Members said their goodbyes, hugged each other, and headed out into the night. The sound of motorcycles filled the air, a familiar rumble that Derek had come to love. He stood on the porch of the clubhouse, watching them go, feeling a peace that seemed to radiate from somewhere deep inside him. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the arrogance and the awakening, the shame and the redemption, the long, slow process of becoming someone better. And he realized that the story he had been telling himself for so many years, the story of Derek Holloway, the brilliant talk show host, the sharp-tongued comedian, the man who always had the last word, had been the wrong story all along. The real story was simpler. It was the story of a man who had been lost and found his way home. A man who had been blind and learned to see. A man who had been alone and discovered that he had always been surrounded by family, if only he had the courage to recognize it. It was the story of second chances, and it was just beginning. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of jasmine and motor oil. Derek smiled and stepped off the porch, walking toward his car. But before he got in, he paused and looked back at the clubhouse one more time. The lights were still on inside, warm and golden against the darkening sky. He thought about Marcus and Elena and Ray and all the others. He thought about Sophie, the little girl whose life had been saved by strangers in leather vests. He thought about the families fed by the pantry, the teenagers guided by the mentorship program, the veterans supported by the network they had built together. He thought about all the lives that had been touched, all the stories that had been written, all the second chances that had been given. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that this was exactly where he was meant to be. Not on a stage, chasing applause. Not behind a desk, crafting clever jokes. But here, among the people who had taught him what it meant to be human. Derek got in his car and drove away, the clubhouse growing smaller in his rearview mirror. But he knew he would be back. He would always come back. Because the Iron Wolves were not just a motorcycle club, they were not just volunteers or veterans or mentors. They were family. And family, Derek had learned, was everything. The stars were out now, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Derek drove in silence, letting the night wrap around him like a blanket. He did not turn on the radio. He did not check his phone. He simply drove and thought and felt grateful for every mile of the journey that had brought him here. Somewhere behind him, the rumble of motorcycles faded into the distance. Somewhere ahead, a new day was waiting to begin. And somewhere in between, a man who had once made jokes about heroes had become one himself. Not through cleverness or charm, but through the simple, profound act of showing up, through the courage to change, through the grace of second chances. The road stretched out before him, dark and endless and full of possibility. Derek Holloway smiled and drove on. Honor does not retire. Brotherhood never ends. And sometimes, the person you are meant to become is just waiting for you to have the courage to meet them. The months following Derek's departure from television brought unexpected revelations to those who had known him longest. His former colleagues at KLTV spoke of a man transformed, someone who had traded the artifice of entertainment for the authenticity of service. Sandra, his producer for all those years, gave an interview where she reflected on the change she had witnessed. He used to measure success by ratings, she said, by the number of laughs he could get in a single monologue. But after he met the Iron Wolves, something shifted. He started measuring success by impact, by lives touched, by the difference he could make in the world. The media took notice. Feature articles appeared in major publications, chronicling Derek's journey from late-night host to philanthropist. The headlines ranged from predictable to genuinely insightful, but they all captured the same essential truth. A man who had spent his career tearing others down had found redemption in building them up. But Derek himself rarely spoke about his transformation. When journalists pressed him for quotes or appearances, he directed them to the Iron Wolves, to the families served by the pantry, to the young people thriving in the mentorship program. "The story is not about me," he told one persistent reporter. "It is about them. It has always been about them." Meanwhile, the Iron Wolves continued their work with characteristic humility. Marcus Cole deflected all attempts to paint him as a visionary or revolutionary. "We just do what needs to be done," he said in a rare interview. "That is all we have ever done." The only difference now is that more people are paying attention, and people were paying attention. The Second Chance Initiative had sparked something larger than any of its founders had anticipated. Similar organizations began appearing in cities across the country, each one inspired by the model the Iron Wolves had created. Motorcycle clubs that had once been dismissed as outlaws were reaching out, asking how they could contribute, how they could serve their communities in meaningful ways. The ripples spread outward, touching lives that Derek and Marcus would never know about. A veteran in Montana who found purpose through a local support group. A teenager in Chicago who avoided a life of trouble because someone believed in him. A family in Florida that did not go hungry because strangers in leather vests decided to help. These were the true measures of success. Not ratings or applause or clever words, but lives changed, hearts healed, communities strengthened. Derek understood this now. He had spent so long chasing the wrong things, measuring himself by standards that ultimately meant nothing. The laughter of strangers, the approval of critics, the fleeting satisfaction of being the smartest person in the room. None of it compared to the feeling of standing beside someone in their darkest moment and helping them find the light. None of it compared to being part of something larger than yourself. 2 years after his last broadcast, Derek received a letter. It was handwritten on simple white paper, and it came from an address he did not recognize. He opened it with curiosity, expecting perhaps a thank you note from someone the foundation had helped. What he found was something far more profound. "Dear Mr. Holloway," the letter began, "you do not know me, but I know you. Or at least, I know the person you used to be. I watched your show for years. I laughed at your jokes. I thought you were the cleverest man on television." Derek felt a chill run down his spine. He kept reading. 2 years ago, I was in a bad place. I had lost my job, my marriage, my sense of purpose. I was angry at everyone and everything, and I remember watching your monologue about the Iron Wolves and thinking, finally, someone who sees the world the way I do. Someone who understands that everything is a joke. The letter continued. "But then you did something I never expected. You apologized. You admitted you were wrong. You showed everyone that you could change." Derek's hands were trembling now. That night I looked in the mirror and asked myself a question I had been avoiding for years. If you could change, why could not I? The letter went on to describe a journey of transformation, of seeking help, of rebuilding relationships, of finding purpose. "I am not the same person I was 2 years ago," the letter concluded, "and neither are you. Thank you for showing me that change is possible. Thank you for giving me hope." There was no signature, just a simple closing. A fellow traveler on the road to redemption. Derek read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully, placed it in his desk drawer, and sat in silence for a long while. He thought about all the monologues he had delivered over the years, all the jokes, all the clever observations, all the moments of manufactured outrage and engineered laughter. He had reached millions of people with those words, but how many of them had he truly touched? And then he thought about one apology, one moment of honesty, one public acknowledgement that he had been wrong. That single moment had reached someone he would never meet, had changed a life he would never know. The ripples of that truth had spread outward in ways he could not have predicted or controlled. It was humbling. It was overwhelming. It was perhaps the most meaningful thing he had ever accomplished. Derek picked up the phone and called Marcus. "I need to tell you something," he said. He read the letter aloud, his voice steady despite the emotion he felt. When he finished, there was silence on the other end. "That is why we do this," Marcus finally said. That is why we show up day after day, even when it seems like no one is watching. Because you never know who needs to see what you are doing. You never know whose life might be changed. Derek nodded, even though Marcus could not see him. Thank you, he said, for everything. Brother, Marcus replied, thank you for listening. The years continued to pass. The Second Chance initiative grew and evolved, adapting to new challenges and new opportunities. Derek remained involved, though increasingly in an advisory capacity, content to let younger leaders take the reins. He had discovered something in those twilight years that surprised him. He did not need to be at the center of things. He did not need to be the one giving the speeches or accepting the awards. He was happiest when he was simply part of the work, one voice among many, one hand among dozens reaching out to help. The Iron Wolves welcomed new members and said goodbye to old ones. Some passed away from illness or age, their memories honored at the cemetery where Derek had first understood the depth of their commitment. Others moved on to new chapters of their lives, carrying the lessons they had learned with them. But the core of what they stood for never changed. The pantry still fed families. The mentorship program still guided teenagers. The veteran support network still provided a lifeline to those who needed it most. And Marcus Cole, gray now but unbowed, continued to lead with the quiet strength that had always defined him. On the 10th anniversary of Derek's first visit to the clubhouse, a celebration was held. It was larger than any gathering they had hosted before, with hundreds of people crowding the property. There were members and volunteers, beneficiaries and supporters, journalists and politicians. But at the center of it all, in a quiet corner away from the noise, Derek and Marcus sat together. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Derek asked. Marcus thought for a moment. "I said a lot of things. You said that the best way to defeat an enemy was not to fight him. It was to change his mind." Marcus nodded slowly. "I remember." "You changed mine," Derek said, "and through me, you changed countless others, people I will never meet, lives I will never know about, all because you decided to show me who you really were instead of what I expected you to be." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I have been thinking lately about legacy," he said, "about what we leave behind when we are gone. And I have come to believe that the truest legacy is not the things we build or the words we speak. It is the people we change." He looked at Derek with eyes that had seen too much and forgiven even more. "You are part of that legacy now. The people you have touched, the lives you have changed, they will go on touching and changing others long after both of us are gone. That is the real work. That is what matters." Derek felt tears on his cheeks. He did not wipe them away. "I was so lost when I met you," he said. "I did not know it at the time, but I was drowning in my own ego. You threw me a lifeline. You and everyone here." "We throw lifelines," Marcus said. "That is what we do. But you had to reach out and grab it. You had to do the hard work of pulling yourself to shore. That was all you, brother. All you." They sat together as the celebration continued around them, two men from different worlds who had found common ground in the simple act of service. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Music drifted from somewhere nearby, accompanied by laughter and conversation. Derek looked around at the scene before him, the children playing, the veterans sharing stories, the volunteers preparing meals, the new members being welcomed into the fold. It was ordinary and extraordinary at the same time, a snapshot of humanity at its best, unfiltered and unscripted. And he realized, with a clarity that brought fresh tears to his eyes, that this was his life now. This was who he had become. Not a talk show host, not a comedian, not the cleverest man in the room. Just a man who had learned to show up. A man who had learned to care. A man who had learned that the measure of a life is not what you take from the world, but what you give back to it. Marcus stood up and extended his hand. "Come on," he said. "They are waiting for us." Derek took his hand and rose to his feet. Together, they walked toward the gathering, two brothers united by bonds stronger than blood, The road that had brought Derek here had been long and winding, full of wrong turns and dead ends. But every step had been necessary, every mistake had been a lesson, every failure had been a foundation for something better. Because that was the nature of redemption. It did not erase the past, it transformed it. And as the stars began to appear overhead, as the voices of friends and family filled the air, Derek Holloway understood at last what it meant to be truly alive. It meant belonging to something larger than yourself. It meant showing up day after day for people who needed you. It meant believing that everyone deserves a second chance. It meant being an iron wolf. The night was warm and full of promise. The future was uncertain but no longer frightening. And somewhere in the distance, the rumble of motorcycles echoed like a heartbeat, steady and strong. Brotherhood never ends. Honor does not retire. And sometimes, the greatest journey is not to a new place, but to a new understanding of who you were always meant to be. Derek smiled and stepped into the light, ready for whatever came next.